There we go. My first duty as replacement for Sally Gaskell this week, who is in Missouri on her family farm. She's actually online right now as well, so that's great. And we've got our recording going here. I'm just going to toggle between various things on screen. Well, welcome to everybody. This is our the weekly celebration of service, the May 17th, 2022. It's great to see you all. My name is Alain Barker, and I will be standing in front of you a number of times this next year, and looking forward to it very much. Okay, at this time, I'd like to invite all US veterans in the room and online to stand and be acknowledged. As an immigrant in this country, I'm mindful and thankful for the service you've provided to this diverse country. And I invite you all to stay standing while we join you in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty for all. Thank you so much. Be seated. You may be seated. We've got a reflection by Jim Shea today, if you'd like to come up to the podium.
Hello, fellow Rotarians in the room and on the Zoom. Well, I've enjoyed speaking with our guest speaker today, Mark Pillar. It's an interesting pairing because he's going to talk about 9/11, and I'm going to talk about the pandemic. And those are, of course, two of the seminal issues of our time. Sure, you saw the stories and headlines last week that in the New York Times and the HT and other places, US passed a very sad milestone of 1 million deaths due to COVID. Unfortunately, we lead the world. For some perspective on that, in 2020, the population of Bloomington was about 80,000. So the pandemic has taken all of Bloomington 13 times over. That's an incredible amount of grief. It's a lot of tragedy in a short amount of time. How many of you know someone who has died from COVID? So lots of us. Well, I thought I'd spend a few minutes retracing how we got to this point. Some of it's my story, but we all have our own pandemic stories. And as I mentioned some time frames and dates, you might reflect on what you were doing then. So the Chinese health authorities released information about a novel coronavirus during the first week of 2020. I remember being on one of my early retirement trips in Hilton Head that January, and I distinctly remember seeing a news story about a virus in China. I had no idea that it would be so earth-shattering. I guess I should have, but I really didn't. A month later, in February of 2020, we were in Colorado visiting family. And I'm going to remember that trip as the end of normalcy for quite a while. In March of 20, the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic, and much of the world, including the US, essentially shut down. We became well acquainted with masks and hand washing, but still nervous about going out. This was a bit of a paranoid time and also a confusing one, as we didn't know exactly how the virus spread, but we did know that hospitals were overflowing and increasing numbers were succumbing to it. Those of us who were lucky were able to stay home and keep ourselves occupied. I spent a lot of time reading and listening to music. My Spotify summary for that year showed that I'd listened to 436 different artists. Many weren't so lucky. First responders and frontline healthcare workers were doing extremely difficult and dangerous work. Service workers, think grocery stores, were keeping us in products. And while we're having applause, let's thank all of those people. Millions more lost their jobs. Our club, like a lot of the world, adapted. We went virtual for quite a few months. We all learned about this thing called Zoom. And what would the pandemic be without it? I remember taking a road trip to Wisconsin on Memorial Day weekend of 20 to see our grandson. Hadn't seen him in quite some time. The roads were eerily empty on Memorial Day weekend, even in Chicago. It felt scary just to stop for gas. But the risk was worth it to see sweet baby James. My mom was in an assisted living facility in Greenwood. I remember arriving there one day to the news that it had completely shut down to outside visitors. That was a tough one. But by the time she was in hospice in October, visitors had returned, and I'm glad she was able to go on her own terms, not the virus's, at 96. 20 was a tough, confusing pandemic year for all of us. But with 21 came the great news of vaccines. My wife and I went to the Brown County Music Center, which is the first place we could get an appointment, for our jabs on February 6th of 21. We got the second dose a month later. We didn't feel invulnerable, but we certainly felt less vulnerable. We took the Moderna vaccine on our trust of science. And later that year, I read a really excellent book, which I highly recommend, called First Shots by Brendan Burrell, which tells the story of the development of the vaccines. I learned that many of the scientists and companies have been doing work in this area for years, and COVID was the time to apply the lessons they'd learned from their work. I trust the vaccine science even more after reading it, and we were happy to get the boosters. After reading about the heroic efforts of many of our world's top scientists to develop the vaccine, it's still a bit surprising that so many have resisted them. In the US, according to the CDC website, as of yesterday, 79% have had one dose and 67% are fully vaccinated. In Indiana, we're lower. 62% have had at least one dose and 55% are fully vaccinated in Indiana. I can't help but wonder what would be happening with the pandemic if those percentages were 90 plus across the board. But life has more or less returned to normal for many. We go to restaurants, we come to our club, we go to concerts. I especially appreciate venues like the Buskirk Chumley that require proof of vaccination. We've returned to travel, even on planes. We've learned to adapt. We've become adept at self-testing. But the virus has learned to adapt too, the variants. I have five fully vaxxed and boosted friends who've tested positive in the past 2 weeks. Don't worry, I haven't been with them. But the Pfizer antiviral drug has been another positive step for a couple of them in their recovery. More hope from science there. So we're now 29 months into our collective pandemic experience, and it's far from over. It's had enormous ramifications on all of our lives, on our economy, and on healthcare across the country. However, we're all still here, and our club is still here. And our hearts go out to the 1 million+ people and their families and friends who are not. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. That was really wonderful. And it also reminds me of how interconnected this world really is. And yet at the same time over the pandemic, how many of the differences it has shown between us who have more than others. So I really appreciate that. Well, let's go ahead and introduce our guests today. We have Dustin Rogers, who's a guest of our speaker, Major General Mark Piller. Very nice to have you both with us. We have Colonel Bob McVeigh and Aaron Dobrin, who are Jim Bright's guests. And we have Edward Jones, Mike Girth, Richard Norman of Virginia Beach, a guest of Jim Bright as well, and also Hannah Laughlin. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much for being here. And Joy, I don't know if we have any guests online.
Yes, Alon, we have many guests online. Can you hear me well enough?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, let me preface by saying these are all guests of our beloved Jim Bright. I would like to welcome Joe Dixon and Randy West. And Randy, I think I saw you, so you can now see things, right? Yay, good, got that figured out. And then we have a number of visiting Rotarians. We have joining us this afternoon, Bob Morrison from Columbus Rotary, also Keith Weedman from that club from Columbus Rotary. Don Harvey, I believe, is here. He is joining us from Columbus Sunrise Rotary. And then we have David Willett joining us from Plymouth, Michigan Rotary. And it should go, I want to note that we have, of course, our Club Rotarians, Owen Johnson, who is currently in France and on Zoom from Alsace. Okay, I'm not sure I'm saying that right. And then, of course, our beloved Rotarian Raj, who joins us from North Carolina. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Joy. Okay, so we want to thank Michael Shermis and Hannah Claire for being with us for our basically working on producing today's event, as well as, of course, Joy Harder. We have Bob Zeltsberg, our reporter for the month. Thank you so much. And then we have Jim Shea for the reflection, and then Winston Chandel for greeting us. So thank you all very, very much. Okay, we have birthdays today. We have Marcus Whitted. Is Marcus with us today? Anyway, we wish him very well for the week. It's his birthday on May 17th. There are no member anniversaries, and that's it for all of our basic announcements. I want to just mention a few other things while we're thinking about announcements. How many of you look at the Rotary Facebook page on a regular basis? Okay, we want to be able to push that a little higher because there's some really great information that we're sharing every week. Owen Johnson is a very active poster, as well as a number of other people. And there's a lot of celebration going on Facebook that we'd like for you to join us with. As an example, we have Rotarian Scott Shackelford, who you all know, one of our wonderful members of our club, who recently was selected as one of the global best 40 under 40 MBA professors worldwide, which is totally phenomenal, by the International, thank you. And the magazine that put that out is a very well-respected magazine called Poets and Quants. We also, Phil Meyer, who you remember is one of our club members who left us a number of years ago, has just been appointed President and CEO of the Southern Oregon Public Broadcasting System. So that's another really great accomplishment of one of our members. And then Mike Baker, who I believe is online. I don't know if you saw the major article about him in the Herald Times. He was featured recently talking about the old but new hops variety that he recently patented after discovering them on his land, which was quite an amazing treat for all of us. So, and then one final thing I want to mention is that Bob Brock, who is a member of the IMU staff, who's been helping us with technology for many, many years, especially now through the pandemic and Zoom, is going to be retiring. And we would love to have you all sign a card to him in thanks for his support of the club. So if you can go ahead and do that. Natalie's passing it around the tables. Okay, a few reminders. We've got Brian Hain, who you all know very well, is developing a new initiative. And I think you've seen this in the roundabout, but if not, here's a little bit more information. Tomorrow at noon, he's offering a free mental health awareness webinar, which is the first of a set of roundtable discussions he's developing within the district. And if you're interested in knowing more about that, there's a very easy website to remember. It's called rotaryroundtable.com, rotaryroundtable.com. It's tomorrow, so if you want to sign up for it, you better do that as soon as possible. In a few weeks' time, we look forward to hosting a number of members of the Palo Alto Rotary Clubs. They're coming here for 3 days. Sally Gaskell and I and a number of members of the Rotary community here in Bloomington have been working with them. We're going to be meeting with the city. We're going to be talking a lot about the integration of Bloomington and Palo Alto as sibling cities. And there's an opportunity for you to meet with them on May 28th between 5 and 7 p.m., we're doing a picnic, and we'd love for you to be able to join us. And if you'd like to do so, please do fill out the survey before Friday the 20th, this coming Friday. We want to know who's going to be there. We'd love to see all of you there. And then Taste of Bloomington, you've received emails from me about the June 18th Taste of Bloomington. Many thanks to all of you, or many of you who've signed up to join us. There are 3 or 4 slots available for that as well, and we invite you to come and join us on that day. June 18th is another really important day for the district. Lance Everly is going to be inducted into as our district governor. It's going to be the district governor changeover during that day as well. Jim, I don't know if there's anything in particular that you want to talk about it. Check your roundabout. Okay, good, fantastic. Well, Jim, I'm going to invite you up to introduce our guest for the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan, and welcome everybody. It's great to see so many guests here today, many of whom were named. I recognize Mike Laris up there, who is the president of Brown County Rotary Club. So welcome, Mike. The turnout is a credit to you, Mark, as our speaker. September 11th, 2001, a date that will live in our minds forever. While we may not have been physically when the hijacked planes crashed into the World Trade Center, or the Shanksville, Pennsylvania field, or at the Pentagon outside of Washington, D.C., these images are forever etched into our mind. We remember where we were and who we were with, and we remember the feelings of horror. On 9/11, our speaker, Major General Mark Piller of the U.S. Air Force, was on the first day of a new job at Strategic Command Headquarters at Office Air Force Base, Nebraska, where he was preparing to conduct war games. Suddenly, as you can imagine, everything changed. Today, Mark is going to share his 9/11 story with us. Mark is past president of the Columbus Rotary Club and a 3-time Paul Harris Fellow. Fellow Rotarians, warm Rotary welcome for Mark Piller.
Well, yeah, quite the day. I tell folks that this was like, yeah, get the nose hairs right. Thank you. It was like our parents' Pearl Harbor, except our parents heard about it and then maybe went to the movie theater and saw a newsreel a week later. We saw everything live as it was happening on TV. So it was a very, very different day. So that's my first day at Stratcom, and I'm the reserve advisor to the commander of Stratcom. I work for a 4-star. Am I covering something up? Oh, that's for me. Thank you. I knew that. Yes, I work for a 4-star admiral, Jim Meese. Great guy. So we're going to start this war game. It's something that we do every day, or every year to exercise. Stratcom is in charge of all the nuclear capability, the submarines, the bombers, the missiles in the silos, and all that kind of stuff. So that's what Stratcom does. So we're going to start the first day, and we start at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we go in and get a weather briefing for the exercise. And we're at point it. No, just next slide. We'll do it that way. Next slide. Okay. All right. I'll go on. So, yeah, we'll get to it. It's no big deal. So we've got a scenario that we're gonna run. We've got people downstairs, the battle staff, and then we've got another battle staff upstairs that is feeding us information on what's going to happen. And so it's like, we've got two fictitious countries that sort of start out throwing stones at each other, and then it escalates so that eventually we have the possibility of going into nuclear conflict. I think we need to go back one. There you go. There's Stratcom headquarters. That's a three-story building. We're 40 feet below that in a nuclear hardened containment area. And if this works, there we go. And that's where we are. We're in this area here. We're around the desks and stuff. Each of those TV screens is 5 feet by 5 feet. So you can have one picture on all of them. What we were doing was we were tracking different things on different screens. We tracked for the exercise. We tracked where the president was, the vice president, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, what checklist we were in, what was going on, what we had already done. So each screen had something different on it. So we were getting, let's see, downstairs there's like 45 of us. There's 7 flag officers, which are general officers and admirals, and 1 political officer. So we're learning about the threats, the messages, the scenario, the weather, and the intel. And then we've got the senior controller. Next slide, please. Senior controller is that lighted area up that you see above us. So they're feeding the information for us, and we're making decisions and doing all that kind of stuff. So we're running scenario, making suggestions, and about 9 o'clock. Next slide. Okay, that's the name of our exercise, Global Guardian 01. That's Admiral Meese there, Academy graduate, graduated first in his class from the Academy. Incredibly brilliant man. Didn't know a lot about tankers, which is why he wanted me as his tanker advisor, because 60% of the air refueling capability is in the Guard and Reserves. So he was a submariner, as he called it, 6 knots to nowhere. Next slide, please. So we're doing our stuff downstairs, and one of the guys upstairs calls and says, calls down on the phone, Admiral Meese. He says, "Hey, sir, there's something going on. I think you need to see this." And so he says, "Okay, put it up on screen number 1." So we turn on screen number 1, and this is what we see. And you know, nobody knows what happened. We hear, we're watching CNN or somebody, and we know that an airplane went into the World Trade Center. We look around, it's severe clear. There's no clouds in the sky. It's not like this guy got disoriented or something. I'm thinking probably some guy in a little airplane had a heart attack and just happened to run into the World Trade Center. So we're watching this and speculating. And next slide, please. And the president is down in Fort Lauderdale, or excuse me, in Sarasota, Florida. And he gets the word that something has happened. And so he jumps into Air Force One and starts heading out. Next slide, please. So while we're watching, we see the second airplane go into the second tower. And Admiral Meese says, "That's no accident. We're under attack." He said, "Send out the messages to cancel the exercise, and we'll go into real world operations," which is exactly what we did. 8:46 is when American Flight 11 from Boston went into the North Tower. 9:03, Flight 175 from Boston went into the South Tower. They closed the airports. Next slide. Yeah, that was American coming out the other side of the World Trade Center. So just a little bit more. 9:21, they closed all the bridges and tunnels leading into New York City. 9:25, all domestic flights were grounded. You got just a bunch of flights coming from Europe back to the States. If they hadn't hit their equal time point, which you probably call point of no return, they would turn back and go back to Europe, wherever they were. The rest of them that were past their equal time point came and landed in Canada. I'm surprised that Labrador did not sink because of all the airplanes and people that were at Goose Bay, Labrador. So what happened then, from our perspective, is we became part of a bigger group that was making decisions, and they were running it out of the Pentagon. It was called the Deputy Director for Operations, the DDO, was running things from the basement of the Pentagon, and we were on like a I can't think of the name of it, a conference call where everybody was listening to everybody else, and we could hear all the phone conversations on our speakers in our room there at Stratcom. So we had Stratcom, Northcom, FAA, NSA, the Secret Service, the CIA, the FBI, FEMA, Air Combat Command, UCOM, Spacecom, and PACOM, and we're all on this line, and what would happen was the DDO would say, we are thinking of doing this. And we would have like maybe a minute before he would start polling the rest of us. We're thinking of doing this, what do you think? Admiral Meese would look around, take in input, and then they would poll everybody, and everybody would give their input as to what they think we should do. They did that with grounding the airplanes. Then we had a discussion. What do you do with airplanes that do not land? There are signals, another airplane can fly up to them, fighter can fly up to them and give them signals that, yes, I want you to land here immediately. There are hand signals that you can do. You lower your gear to tell the guy to land. Then we said, okay, then what do we do for the ones that refused to do that? And the decision was made by Vice President Cheney with input that we would shoot them down. And that was a tough decision because there are going to be Americans on those planes. But for the greater good of the nation, we thought that was the right thing to do. Let's see if this works. Yeah. Yeah, another airplane went into the Pentagon. And it was a lot of the nut jobs crawled out from under their rocks and made phone calls to a lot of various agencies. And of course, we had to respond to all of them. There was a Delta Airlines airplane on the ramp at Cleveland that had a bomb on it. The Transamerica building had a bomb there. Of course, there was a bomb at the White House. There was a bomb at John Hancock Center in Chicago. There's all this stuff going on. There was a fleet of Ryder trucks that had explosives in them, and they were heading to Cheyenne Mountain to blow that place up. There was a flight of 4 crop dusters coming up from Mexico that were going to spray anthrax on Phoenix. That's the kind of stuff that was going on that nobody knew about except those of us that were running around trying to figure out where the next threat is coming from. My biggest fear was that they would get into the water, into the reservoir somehow and ruin the water and kill a lot of people that way. Luckily, that didn't happen. So talk a little bit, while I was in the reserves for 27 years, active duty 8 years. While I was in the reserve, I was also flying for Delta Airlines. Our training taught us as pilots to listen to the hijacker, take the hijacker wherever they want to go, cooperate, and they'll have their 15 minutes of fame and get their buddies out of jail, and then you take your passengers and get them to safety. Nobody ever trained us. Nobody ever thought that they would weaponize an airplane the way that they did, which is why it caught us completely off guard. I don't think that they thought that the World Trade Centers would collapse. I think that was just sort of an unexpected byproduct for them. I don't think they had the smarts to know that the beams were going to melt and the whole thing was going to fall in on itself. But they did what they did, and so we adjusted for that. So yeah, I'm just going through some stuff, make sure I cover everything. So the president leaves Florida and he goes to Barksdale Air Force Base. So he finds out that he doesn't have the communications that he thought he had on Air Force One. And I sort of found that hard to believe until this last year was the 20th anniversary. And I saw some stuff on it on 9/11. And what happened was Air Force One flew up to 50,000 feet. You're not going to get much radio coverage at 50,000 feet. So that's why he didn't have the communications that he had. So he goes to Barksdale first, and they don't have their comms up running correctly. So he comes to Offutt because we're running this worldwide exercise. We've got our communications backed up about 3 ways to Sundays, and he can talk to anybody he wants, any place around the world from where we are in Offutt. So one of the other things they asked, or they polled us, was to shut down all the navigational aids throughout the country. There are radio stations all over the place that airplanes used to use for navigation in the air. Now it's mostly GPS. So they said, we're going to implement SCATANA. What do you think? And that's the acronym. It's Security Control of Air Traffic and Air Navigation Aids. And that was implemented. The plan would be to implement that if the Russians came to bomb us, we would turn off the nav aids and make it more difficult. So Admiral Meese turns around and just to nobody in particular and says, what the hell, SCATANA? And since I was an old SAC guy, there was me and one other older gentleman that knew what it was, could tell him what it was. So we did shut down all the nav aids. 2 weeks later, when we had a debrief of this whole thing, and I think I just touched the screen the wrong way. When we had a debrief of the whole thing, I asked the commander of North American Command, I said, did you think about shutting down the GPSs? He said, we did. He said, but if you shut down the GPSs, you shut down the banking industry all over the world. So we decided not to do that. I said, that's a good idea, boss. Yeah. So, the president comes to STRATCOM, and Admiral Meese tells us, he says, okay, we think that the president might be coming here. He says, no outside phone calls. So nobody does anything. And we're watching the local news, and there's this guy standing out the front gate, and he says, and there's a rumor that the president will come in. Oh yeah, there's Air Force One right now. So much for security. So the president lands at STRATCOM, and well, there's Shanksville. And comes in and, let's see if this thing, okay. So on the far left-hand side there, you can just barely see a door, but it's a big steel door. It's about this wide. It's nuclear, they close it, lock it, nuclear hardened. That's the way the admiral would get out. There's an escape hatch to get him up to an airplane and get him out. So the president comes in through that door and sees all the stuff that's on the board there, all the things that we're tracking, and looks at that, and then sort of does a double take, and then he looks at us, and we're all standing at attention, and he comes in, and he sits down with Admiral Meese, and Admiral Meese tells him, shows him on the board what's going on and what we've done and what we haven't done and what checklist we're in and all that kind of stuff. So he just briefs the president, gets him up to speed on what's been going on. So while the president is sitting there, he gets a phone call and it's Secretary Rumsfeld, and they're still on the party line. And the president says, Don, he says, I need to tell you that we're not the only two listening to this conversation. He says, I've got about 30 of my new closest friends here in the room with me, and they can all hear what you say. And Secretary says, well, thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the heads up. And the president says, well, Don, he says, I needed to do that. He says, because I'm never sure what's going to come out of a former Navy fighter pilot's mouth. And if you knew anything about Rumsfeld, he was very colorful, let's put it that way. So they had their little conversation, and then the president gets up and he goes into another top secret secure area where he can get on video conference with the folks back in DC. They did not want him to come back. They thought it was too soon. He was very adamant that he did want to get back into Washington to show the world that, okay, we had, we got a little bit of a bloody nose here, but we're still up and running, and we're still in charge of things, and we're trying to figure out where the next attack may come from. So that day, I think I finally got out of there about 8 o'clock at night, starting from 6 in the morning. Luckily, I was staying in visitor officers' quarters that were just across the street from the headquarters building. So I walked across the street, stopped at the officers' club, which was right by my quarters, had a beer or 6, and went back to my room, took a shower. I had something to eat, took a shower, pretty much collapsed. The rest of the week was Groundhog Day. Well, we got up the same thing and did everything the same day, and he got all the intel updates, and all the agencies were working together at this time much better than they had in the past. Perseverance will prevail. I think that was pretty cool what they did there at the Pentagon. Let us not forget that we are at war. But I say that, and I tell people we're a Department of Defense at war. It basically hasn't affected the rest of us. We're not rationing anything. We're not limited in our travel. We can go wherever we want to go, buy whatever we want to buy. But the DoD has been at war since 2001. And that's why we have more veterans today than we had at the end of World War II. Because we've been in constant conflict for over 20 years. I could go on for a lot more time, but I'd like to open up for questions if you have anything specific you'd like to ask. And thank you for the Zoomies out there. Appreciate you folks joining us today. Yes, ma'am. Okay, the question was, when did we find out who the enemy was? And that's a great question. And that was one of the things that really impressed me. We put our heads down and did our jobs. Nobody went running out of the door and said, let's go get those guys, because we did not know who those guys were. As it turns out, there were certain cells in certain areas that knew that this was happening, but didn't know that that was happening. And I'm talking about intel mostly. A lot of that stuff, they held it pretty close to the vest. So it was days before, we sort of thought maybe bin Laden was behind it, but it was days before we had some concrete evidence that that's what it was. And they retraced the steps of the hijackers and figured out, why are these guys going to flight school and they don't want to learn to land? Well, they weren't going to land anywhere. They were going to run into stuff. The airplane that went into Shanksville was supposed to go at the Congress. What they were doing is they were attacking the military through the Pentagon. They were attacking commerce through the World Trade Center, and then they would attack our civilian government by hitting Congress. Yeah, Zoomers, what you got?
I'm curious, what changes can you tell us that have been made in preparations for some kind of unexpected task or attack based on what happened in 2001?
Well, I mean, immediately, airport security just went nuts. Homeland Security, DHS, is now a whole new entity. You have to take your shoes off. You have to, all that kind of stuff. That's very visible. What has also happened is that the intelligence agencies work more with each other than separately, and that has helped. It's not the guess what you don't know that I know kind of stuff, not as much as it was before. They were all trying to save their little rice bowls, and they're part of the funding. And so if they could show up better than the next guy, then that made it easier for them to get funds. Does that answer your question? Okay, we're running a microphone around. Here we go.
I think a lot of people don't understand the things that you probably know that we don't know. If you were going to say after this event, were there things that you apprehended before they became really bad things as a result of this event?
I would say yes. We didn't immediately go into Afghanistan, but eventually we did. And by shutting down a lot of those cells and finding out about other cells in the United States that were planning other events, I know for a fact that we nipped a lot of that stuff in the bud. And a lot of people ask me, well, when are we going to get out of Afghanistan? And I say, that's a really good question. When are we going to get out of Japan? When are we going to get out of Germany? When are we going to get out of Italy? When are we going to get out of England? We tend to maintain a presence there in case something does happen. When we left after Desert Storm, we left a whole bunch of equipment in Saudi Arabia in case we had to go back and use it. And I'm sure that the Army did go back and run it over to Iraq and Afghanistan. So yeah, I'm positive that we stopped a lot of bad things from happening. I think there was a question over here. Here comes the mic.
General, as I understand, the U.S., probably through your command, Joint Command, shut down all flights out of the country that day. Is that correct?
We shut them all in the country and all those coming into the country.
My question is, as I understand, the bin Laden family was allowed to fly out of the United States that day.
I don't know of that one way or the other. I have no knowledge.
It was in
of
a
that.
movie I saw.
Okay, well, if it's in the movie or
Must be
if you saw it
true.
on the internet, you know it was true. No, I have no clue. Getting back to that, one of the guys that I worked with was asked the question, another 4-star, and they said, so why should we go and invade Afghanistan? He said, well, he says, we've played one home game and we didn't like that. We're going to make them all away games from now on. And I thought that was a pretty good analogy. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm just wondering about how you're feeling about the nuclear capability right now, given the uncertainties in Ukraine.
It's there. There's no question about it. I don't know who knows what Putin's going to do? I'm not sure he knows. what surprises me is they have a far superior conventional capability. And it's doing nothing. They're destroying the cities and they're destroying the people and they're creating a lot of refugees. But I think Putin just sort of figured he'd march in, they'd throw up a white flag, and that he would annex the Ukraine. And it hasn't turned out that way. And personally, it surprised me. And I think it surprised a lot of people a lot of other people around the country. But mostly, I think it surprised Putin. But he has the capability, and it doesn't have to be a big Hiroshima kind of thing. They've got tactical nuclear capabilities that they can use, and we have the same thing. So we're sort of at a nuclear standoff, which is much like the Cold War that lasted 50 years. I think I have time for one more question, and then we hit the rotary limit. Yes, ma'am.
Back to 9/11, was there anyone who could have stopped the president from making the decisions he made?
I don't think so. Maybe his wife. That'd be my guess. But no,
No one to stop him from going back to
no.
Washington?
He's the president. He's the commander in chief. And that's another thing. And that's why one of the reasons why I do this is to make the American public aware of what else was going on. We weren't just sitting around thinking, oh no, what do we do next? We were actually planning on what we do. We weren't wringing our hands. We weren't jumping up and saying, let's go get those people, whoever they were. We were, to my mind, we were doing our jobs. Everyone was focused. We're the Department of Defense. Our job is to defend Americans on our soil and not on our soil. And I got 1 minute left, so I'll give this to your incoming president, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much. So in recognition of your talk today, we're going to be giving a gift to the Bloomington-based Tandem Birthing Center, which is every quarter we choose a different organization to support. So thank you very much. And I'm sure we are all so grateful for the expertise and knowledge and depth of wisdom that you all bring to the table. So thank you very much for keeping us safe. Okay, so in closing, next week we have Jeff Haswald, who is the superintendent of schools, MCCSC, and he's going to be giving an update on their referendum. So that's going to be interesting. Looking forward to seeing you all next week. So Michael, shall we show the four-way test? So let's close the meeting by reciting our four-way plus one test. Of the things we think, say, or do, first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, would it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it benefit to all? And fifth, is it fun? Thank you all so much.